Welcome to Queer History, where we conduct long form interviews with queer people and allies, leaving a lasting positive impact. Today, let's welcome horror author extraordinaire of the book Manhunt and forthcoming Cuckoo, Gretchen Felker-Martin. Welcome to the program. Now that Manhunt has been out for a while, what impact have you seen from the book being out in the world?
Well, I mean, that's a tricky question, right?
Mhm.
Um, I can tell you my favorite thing that I know it's given me
Mm.
personally, which is that um, invariably at author events there are young trans people who come up to me and tell me like, "Oh, this really made me feel like I was part of a bigger world for the first time," and that's very special to me. That is really more than I ever could have hoped to get out of writing a book.
Hmm. Thank you for that answer. And, I did wonder also, after having Manhunt out, your career is at a new level. And I wonder, what would you tell yourself at the beginning of your career based on where you are now?
Oh my god, log off Twitter immediately. Get off. Never talk again.
For sure. Huh. I read a couple of your previous articles. I loved your Time article about why we love horror, and
Oh, thank
you
you.
you said that through vicarious experiences of terror and violence, we satisfy our mortito, the death drive. And I wonder, could you tell me more about those vicarious experiences in horror? What do you see as the essential elements of a horror story?
Well, I think that horror can take many forms. Um, but to me, horror is all about the crisis, the presence of crisis, whether it's a crisis image, something shocking that sparks a physical reaction from your body, a wound, a corpse, something where it shouldn't be, or positioned in a way it shouldn't be, or with a nature it shouldn't have. Horror is about transgression, and it's about physical response. It's about your body entering fight or flight. Um, so I think in order for something to be horror, it has to jolt you in that particular way, at least once. What it does once it has is up to the creator, but
Hmm.
that's the prerequisite in my mind.
I like it. And do you think that there is anything essential to how a horror story ends? For me, I tend to think that the difference between a thriller versus horror story, they can look very similar, but in a thriller, you have the chance for a happy ending. But in a horror story, even if you have a happy ending, it feels like it came at too great a cost. Do you see any kind of essential element to the ending of a horror story?
Well, I like a downer ending personally. I'm a big fan of that Trent Reznor quote when Nine Inch Nails went on stage after I can't remember the band, but it was back in, I want to say, 2002, and he comes out and tells the crowd, "Is everyone ready to have a good time?" And they all cheer, and he says, "Wrong fucking band. Those are the last guys. We're here to have a bad time," and just immediately launches into the set. Um, so that's my ethos. I love to have a bad time. I love to feel bad. I love it when horror novels end with just complete desolation and loss and really profound misery.
Mm.
Um, but I don't think that there's a precondition. Horror can look so many different ways, and horror can even be kind of like unadventurous and conservative culturally in some ways. Like, you can certainly use horror to suggest that things outside the workaday life and the nuclear family are scary and have to be defeated so everything can go back to normal and everyone can watch TV and own two and a half cars.
Right, right. Now, in a similar vein, could we get more specific? What do you see as the essential elements of a Gretchen Felker-Martin story?
Hmm. I I want people to feel unsatisfied. I want them to walk away from the book thinking like, well, what the hell happens next with this? Or was any of this worth it? Did they do the right things? Did the characters succeed? I don't have those answers in life. I don't feel much interest in pretending I have them in fiction. Do the characters in Manhunt survive? Do they find a way to overcome the plague and rebuild some kind of society? I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe this is the last generation of humans who will ever live.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, and I really love that about Manhunt. There are some really bleak aspects to the story as a whole, and then in the ending. But for me, I like to bring that back to my real life. It helps me face some things that are bleak in the real world that I similarly don't have any control over.
Thanks. Yeah, no, it fulfills a similar function for me.
Um, do you think are there stories that you're deeply interested in seeing told, but you think need to be told by someone other than you?
Yes, absolutely. I think that as it stands right now, horror as a literary field is very, very white. Um, and there are a lot of stories that are not mine to tell that I'm tremendously interested in seeing. I want to see more creators like Tiff Morris and Stephen Graham Jones who are bringing an indigenous viewpoint to horror, um, in addition to just being tremendously talented. I think that a genre is only as vibrant and vital and worthwhile as it is open to outside perspectives.
Hmm. Well, I like it. I like it. And oh, here's a question I got from something that you wrote for Time. You said, when we understand what drives violence in the world, we can make sense of what may otherwise seem incomprehensible. So I wonder, how do we use horror to understand the real world or to go a step further and affect change in the real world, even if it's just for the evolution of ourselves?
Yeah, I think that most change derived from art is very personal in nature. We know that art can't stop a war or unseat a president or what have you. We have just infinite proof of this. But I think that when you give yourself these opportunities to begin to understand psychologically aberrant actions and people who are living in worlds defined by really intense symptoms of mental illness or crushing circumstances, it can become a little more survivable to exist in the world as it is, to encounter abusive parents or warmongering nations or completely unself-aware politicians and billionaires. And you realize, well, that's just a messed up little monkey, really, at the end of the day. Someone played with the knobs too much and now it's ruined. And I can't say that I feel sympathy for everyone out there who is actively poisoning the world or torturing their children or their spouse or what have you. But I do feel like I have a bit of a better understanding of where they're coming from. I understand that so many of these actions come from enormous crushing loneliness and terror.
Yeah. Oh. I also wanted to ask you then, because you make so many good points, I wonder how, as storytellers, as writers, how do we balance telling a story versus making a point?
I think if you tell a good enough story, it'll make its own points.
I think that's a great answer. That's so true. You have to inspire the reader to start thinking about these things and have a conversation with themselves.
Right, exactly. Ursula K. Le Guin isn't stopping to lecture you. She gets everything across in the
Yeah.
course of the narrative.
Mm. A good point. It needs to be organic. Um, Now, here's something else. I recently spoke with Naomi Alderman, the author of the Trans Ally book and TV show The Power. She says that as a Jewish person, she believes most people would not be part of the resistance against Nazis. The biggest fear isn't in silence, it's in us being complicit without even realizing it. And I wonder if you share that fear, whether you believe the greatest danger isn't in how to stop Nazis, but in recognizing whether we're on the path to becoming one or at minimum empowering them.
Absolutely. I think about it all the time. To live in a world that has been shaped by fascism for close to a century now, I don't know how anyone isn't thinking of it all the time. Um, this is a, for all intents and purposes, a Nazi country. It's built on genocide, funded by prison labor. It's a nightmare that exports bombs and misery. Um, and it's true that a lot of people don't even care. I mean, even to the level of protesting verbally. It's a hard thing to live with. I've also seen a lot of strongly principled resistance, um, both physically and ethically. It's yeah, it's tough to retain some sense of hope, but I think it's there.
Yeah, me too. Well, to get a little more personal, tell me about you as a storyteller, a trans person, as a human. What do we need to understand about your story?
Hmm. That's an area where I usually let the work speak for itself. But I think I think if there's one thing that I want to communicate to people about myself, it's my deep belief in the value of pain and discomfort, especially in safe areas like our artistic lives. I think that if you can subject yourself to discomfort in art, you can create an opportunity to grow as a human being. Um, you can develop empathy for new groups. You can challenge your conceptions of things like beauty or worth, and being open to the pain of these processes and the subsequent pain of realizing that perhaps there are real fundamental cracks in your worldview that need to be addressed. If you can't do those things, the risk of stagnation is just really terrifying.
Stagnation or regression?
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, so let me bounce off that with a different question. Because you're talking about what horror does for us, that I think it does in a way that other genres don't do the same thing. And I loved your article about seeing The Sopranos through a horror lens. I just watched that for the first time, and then I saw your article. It was a great way to revisit the show and see it through a different lens. And I wonder what you would say. How is horror uniquely suited to grant us insight into subjects?
That is such a good question. And thank you, by the way. The Sopranos is my favorite show. I really adore it. Um, and I think that it has so much in common with horror and draws so much from horror, in part because they both require this sort of close attention to human nature. Think about the way that The Sopranos is funny. Very seldom is it a character telling jokes. It's usually someone being confused or incorrect or angry and just like letting something out of themselves that is kind of patently ridiculous. Um, and horror really depends on that kind of honesty too. When you see someone in terror, you are seeing them in a completely unvarnished state. um, And I think that is the big insight that horror is poised to give us in fiction, is we're looking at people who are stripped of pretense. When they're afraid, they'll reveal things about themselves they may not even admit.
Mm. Hmm. Yes, it's a lens for clarity and honesty. When someone's terrified for their life, they tend to get honest.
Yes.
Hmm. Um, could I ask you about your journey as an artist, as a human? How have you come to see your differences as a kind of worthiness?
Hmm. Well, I am who and what I am, and I've made choices to surround myself with people like myself in those ways. My family, my friends, my lovers, those are trans people, they're queer people. Um, they're people who are in a lot of ways undesirable to the mainstream. Um, and I love that about us and for us, because it gives you all these opportunities to do things that are not mired in the assumptions that make up straight culture and sort of the nuclear family way of existing, which is so sort of, it can contain good things, it can contain good individuals, but as a system, I think it's fundamentally corrupt and regressive, and mostly exists to sort of keep us separate from each other and prevent the formation of communities.
Mm, mm.
Um, so how do I see my differences as
Worthiness.
positive?
Yes.
I think I do, because that's the choice I have. I could be miserable that it's harder for me to succeed than it is for people who aren't trans or who aren't fat or who don't have mental illnesses. And I guess there are ways you could construe that as being justified or whatever, but I don't think it would make me happy, and I don't think it would make any of my loved ones happy either. It's kind of boring.
Yeah.
um I have to find a joy and engagement and motivation in the life that I have, not the life that I want to have. Um, and in doing that, it becomes the life that I want. I
Mhm.
enjoy living as part of the trans community. I wouldn't trade it if I could. I don't have any particular desire to be cis.
Oh, do you feel like writing within horror helps you confront some of those things and find some acceptance?
Absolutely, absolutely. Writing horror has really helped me with self acceptance in so many ways.
Well, the last few questions I have for you, and then we'll be done. Some of these are pretty simple, but ironically, this is sometimes what people have to think the longest about. So, Gretchen, I wonder, what is a word you love?
I love the word abrogate, meaning to sort of abandon responsibility.
Neat. What's a word you hate?
Mm, glimmer. I'm not a big fan of glimmer. That's such an unpleasant sound to me.
Hmm. How interesting. What is a sound you love?
I love footsteps in the snow. I was just listening to that this morning.
Here, here. Boy, me too. What's a sound that you hate?
Well, there is some kind of smoke detector or carbon monoxide sensor in the back hall of my building that has been out of batteries for, I think, a month. Um, And so a couple of times a day for like 5 to 10 minutes, it will make this horrible chirping sound to remind us all that it still exists,
Oh my God.
and that I have a landlord who does not like showing up. And I hate it. I hate it with my entire life.
I hear it. I hear you. Gretchen, if you could only take one book, one movie, one music album, which would you take to a deserted island?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think it would have to be, man, I'm gonna go with Ulysses. For a movie, I'm gonna say Porco Rosso by Miyazaki. I feel like that would be a really good chilling on a beach movie.
Mm.
Um, and for an album, that's a tough one. Wow, I feel really stumped here. Maybe Nine Inch Nails Ghosts 1 through 4, or Aphex Twins Selected Ambient Works Volume 2.
Oh, yeah. Well, you must be a really big Trent Reznor fan.
I am a really big Trent Reznor fan.
I don't blame you. I mean, the guy has been making stunning music for decades.
Yeah, no, he's still at it, you know. Just
Eh, and moving into movie scores, this just shows the diversity of his talent.
yeah, no, he really has it when it comes to film scores. Even movies I really couldn't care less about, he does incredible work.
I must have listened to the soundtrack for The Social Network 1,000 times by now.
Oh, it's so good.
Uh-huh. Gretchen, I got one last question for you. Let me tee it up. The other thing that Naomi Alderman told me was that she believes it's just not possible to know the meaning of our lives while we're still here. That meaning may not be apparent until long after we're gone. She said you wouldn't know whether you were Hitler's grandmother until it was already a fact. So, in that spirit, I wonder, long after you're gone, how would you like to be remembered?
Just hope that people are glad to have known me. That's all.
Yeah,
I don't have any big ambitions for history.
I hear you. Well, for what it's worth, I'm glad we got a chance to talk.
Yeah, really lovely. Thank you so much for having me on, Stephanie.
Would you, as you're leaving, tell all the fine folks what you've got coming up and how to stay in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am on Blue Sky at Scumbelievable at bluesky dot social. And I have the same handle on Twitter, which I am no longer on, but which still posts updates for my books and my film writing. So you can follow me either of those two places. And upcoming, I have my second novel, Cuckoo, this June the 11th. And then early next year, I have my third book, Black Flame.
Oh, I had not heard about the next book. How exciting.
Yeah, I'm very much looking forward to it.